Hello, my name is Dominic Frisby, and today we look at the mystery of America's gold. Two rumours have been swirling around the gold markets for many years. Some have called them conspiracy theories. Others note that conspiracy theories often prove true. What is the difference between conspiracy and truth? About 5 years. The first is that China has far more gold than it says it does. And we now know this to be true. Indeed, I've done a lot of research on this, and I'll post links in the comments to some of the research I have done if it is of interest. The other is that America, the USA, has far less than the 8,133 tons of gold that it says it possesses. And this rumour has been doing the rounds since 1971, when Peter Beater, a lawyer and a financial advisor to former President JFK, said he'd been informed that the gold in Fort Knox had been removed. And he went on to write a best-selling book about it, The Conspiracy Against the Dollar. And the problem is a total lack of transparency on the part of the US authorities, something that, according to current US President Donald Trump and the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk, will not be the case for much longer. But to understand this situation and how it came about, we need to go back in time, all the way to 1933, when US President Franklin D. Roosevelt famously devalued the US dollar and revalued gold upwards by 70%, from $20 an ounce to $35 an ounce, in order to bolster US growth. US gold reserves would increase to unprecedented levels over the next 15 years. Some of the gold came from US citizens. It was now illegal for them to own gold, and they had to hand any they owned over to the authorities. Some came from the fact that the US government, bought all American mine supply, and the upwards revaluation of gold had triggered a huge mining boom across the world through the 1930s. It also bought any gold imported to the US Assay Office. The US even began buying gold on foreign markets to protect this new higher price. Thus, in 1939, on the eve of World War II, US official holdings totalled 15,679 tons, and they would only increase. With the Nazi invasions, European nations sent all the gold they could across the Atlantic, either for safekeeping or to buy essential supplies. And 1949 saw the high watermark of US gold holdings, 22,000 tons, as much as half of all the gold that had ever been mined. How about that? Now, in 1944, with it clear that the Allies were going to win World War II, representatives from the 44 Allied nations met in a hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, for the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference to design a new system of money for the new world order. And international accounts would be settled in dollars, and those dollars were convertible to gold at $35 an ounce. And countries had to maintain exchange rates within 1% of the US dollar. So in effect, the US was on a gold standard and the rest of the world was on a dollar standard. And the system relied on the integrity of the US dollar to work. And that integrity was in question even before the end of the war. The June 1945 Federal Reserve Act reduced required gold reserves for notes outstanding from 40% to 25%. And against deposits from 35% to 25%. Between 1944 and 1954, because of the increased supply of dollars, the dollar lost a third of its purchasing power, but the $35 Bretton Woods price still remained. US government spending was soaring, and it began running balance of payments deficits, made worse by the costs of foreign aid, America's new welfare systems, and maintaining a military presence in Europe and Asia. And so gold began leaving the US. By 1965, US reserves had fallen by 9,500 tons, down 40% from the 1949 peak. Successive American administrations tried to stop the outflow. They couldn't. Eisenhower banned Americans from buying gold overseas. Kennedy imposed the equalization tax on foreign investments. Johnson discouraged Americans from travelling altogether. "We may need to forego the pleasures of Europe for a while," he said. And fears that the dollar would devalue following the Kennedy election win sent the gold price in London to $40 an ounce. And so the Bank of England, in collusion with the Federal Reserve, began increasing gold sales to keep the gold price down. And thus did the London gold pool begin, with the addition of 6 major European nations the following year: Belgium, France, the Netherlands, West Germany, Italy, and Switzerland. And they coordinated sales to suppress, or stabilise, to use their word, the gold price and diffuse unwanted upward market pressure. But demand was growing, and the pool struggled against that growing demand. In 1965, an ounce of gold was still $35, but the purchasing power of the dollar had decreased by 57% from 1945. Gold reserves had also fallen sharply. The culprit was the costs of the US government, in particular the Vietnam War and President Johnson's enormous welfare spending. And by the way, I'll just stop here for a moment. If you're buying gold to protect yourself in these uncertain times, and you should own some if you don't already, I strongly believe that, I recommend the Pure Gold Company. Pricing is competitive, quality of service is high. They deliver to the UK, US, Canada, Europe, or you can store your gold with them. And I'll put a link in the article. And if you call them up, tell them I sent you. I'll put a link in the description. So, with inflation rising at home and international confidence in the dollar waning, these programs were not just costly, they undermined Bretton Woods. Non-American nations felt aggrieved that they had to produce $100 worth of goods and services to get a $100 bill when the US could just print one. And French Finance Minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, I hope I pronounced that correctly, called it America's exorbitant privilege. President Charles de Gaulle, meanwhile, had had enough. He ignored the pool and started to turn French dollars and sterling balances, all of them, into gold. The French even sent battleships to New York to collect their gold. Can you imagine that? And de Gaulle became the target of several assassination attempts. Coincidence, I'm sure. There were more US dollars in the world than there was gold to back them, he felt. And he was right. By 1967, US foreign liabilities were $36 billion, but it only had $12 billion in gold reserves, a third of what was needed to back the dollar. West Germany, Spain, Switzerland, they all began demanding gold for their dollars. Even the British, with sterling going through one of its quadrennial collapses, asked the Americans to prepare $3 billion worth of Fort Knox gold for withdrawal. Private gold demand was overwhelming. Everyone could see that the price was wrong. In November 1967, the British government devalued the pound by 14%, from $2.80 to $2.40, in order to achieve a substantial surplus on the balance of payments consistent with economic growth and full employment. Blech. In that month, the London market saw greater bullion demand than it would typically see in 9, as much as 100 tonnes per day. And to stem demand, they banned forward buying, leverage, and the purchase of gold with credit. The pool still lost 1,400 tonnes that year, more than a whole year's mined supply. And selling pressure on the US dollar only increased when the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese People's Army of Vietnam launched the first of a series of surprise attacks on US armed forces in South Vietnam in January 1968. Desperate to prop up the system, US military aircraft began flying ton after ton of gold to RAF Lakenheath, from where it was trucked in military convoys to the back entrance of the Bank of England. At one point, the floor of the Bank of England's weighing room collapsed under the weight of all the gold. It's just incredible. And in the 4 days between March the 11th and March the 14th, 1968, some 780 tonnes were sold to market. The effort to protect the price was deemed hopeless. And so on the 15th of March, UK Chancellor Roy Jenkins declared a bank holiday and the gold market was closed for a fortnight at the request of the United States. Zurich also closed. Paris stayed open, but gold was trading at a 25% premium. All in all, the final 15 months saw over 3,000 tonnes sold to market to protect that $35 price. The pool had lost more than an eighth of its reserves. 2 days later, in the rushed-through Washington Agreement, governors of the central banks in the gold pool declared there would be one fixed gold market for official government transactions at $35 an ounce and another free market price for private transactions. Not for the last time, central bankers were living in a world of their own. Gold is one thing. Gold standards are another. They tend not to last, particularly bogus ones, such as this one, under which citizens themselves did not handle gold. Keynes called them barbarous, ironic perhaps, given that he was one of the architects of this one. In August 1971, President Nixon took the US off the gold standard, a temporary measure that remains more than 50 years later. For the first time in history, gold, Switzerland aside, played no part in the global monetary system. Of course, it was the fault of the speculators. It always is.
Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
The US keeps its gold in 4 places. At Fort Knox, Kentucky, roughly 56% of its 8,133 tonnes, at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, about 8%, and the remaining 36% at the mints in Denver and West Point. There has not been a public audit of this gold since 1943. There have been internal audits, especially between 1974 and 1986, but these were not transparent. And there are many people, among them gold experts, who do not believe the gold is there. The US spent it trying to suppress the gold price in the 1960s, they say. But in this new age of American transparency, both Trump and Musk have repeatedly pledged that this gold will be audited. There is even talk of it being done on a live stream. Trump has even suggested that the gold has been stolen.
We're actually going to Fort Knox to see if the gold is there, because maybe somebody stole the gold.
Now, they've been making such light of it, one has to assume they know the gold is there. Elon Musk was laughing about the conspiracies on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he even posted a picture of a Fort Knox starter kit, a brick and some gold spray. I can't see how they would be joking if there were any serious doubts. Either that, or they don't realise the significance. Or it isn't significant. Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, has said quite categorically that the gold is there.
I can tell the American people on camera right now that there was a report September 30th, 2024. All the gold is there. Any U.S. senator who wants to come and visit it can arrange a visit through our office.
But this would only have been an internal audit, and it would not have been a full audit, only a sample. According to the US Mint, the only gold removed has been very small quantities used to test the purity of gold during regularly scheduled audits. No other gold has been transferred to or from the depository for many years. How long is many years, though? As far back as the 1960s? I find it quite astonishing just how secretive the whole thing is. They opened the vaults for a congressional delegation and certain members of the press to view the gold in 1974. There were rumours swirling about then, too. We've never done this before and will probably never do it again, said the then director of the US Mint, Mary Brooks. Then, in 2017, during Trump's first administration, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell were both invited to view the gold. The gold was there, Mnuchin said. He is sure nobody's moved it. There are serious security protocols in place. But there are more than 4,000 tons in Fort Knox. A ton would be about the size of a medium to large suitcase or a large beach ball, like that. Did he see all 4,000 of them? The other big issue is the purity of the gold. What is there might not be of what they call good delivery quality, meaning it would not be readily accepted in international bullion markets. If much of the gold is the bullion that Roosevelt confiscated in the 1930s, it would be in the form of coin melt, melted down coins. And the most commonly confiscated coin was the $20 double eagle. And many other coins were the same. They were only 90% pure. They were mixed with copper to make them harder. Gold sovereigns are the same. They're only about 90% pure. And when melted down, they were not properly refined to modern standards. While the bars they were melted into weighed 320, 330 ounces, not the 400-ounce bars of good delivery standard today. In practice, this means Fort Knox gold would not be accepted without additional processing. But until a proper audit takes place, this is all speculation, albeit reasoned speculation. We don't know the full facts. The reasons given for not conducting a full audit are flimsy. We don't need to do it. It would be too much of an undertaking. Please. If the US gold turns out not to be there, then the gold price goes up, potentially by a lot. There could even be a financial panic. If it is there, it's business as usual. For now, I'd say the markets are behaving as though it's business as usual. They're climbing. Every dip is being bought, largely it seems by central banks, especially in Asia, who are diversifying their holdings and de-dollarizing. But this audit cannot come quickly enough. Large volumes of physical gold, over 1,000 tons by some counts, have recently been transferred from London to New York. One theory is that the gold was transferred in anticipation of tariffs. Another is that it was US buying ahead of its own audit. We will soon find out. Lastly, I would just like to debunk one theory that's been doing the rounds, and that is that US gold is currently marked to market at $42 an ounce. After the audit, those 8,133 tonnes, assuming they're there and of good delivery quality, could be marked to market at current prices, $3,000 an ounce, meaning a significant uplift in the value of its holdings. The theory doing the rounds is that Treasury Secretary Besant will use some of this upwards revaluation to monetize the balance sheet, not unlike what Roosevelt did in 1933, to create funds for, among other things, the strategic Bitcoin reserve. But Besant has quite clearly stated that is not his intention.
Is it under consideration for this administration to revalue gold?
I think that somehow when we were talking about the sovereign wealth fund and I said monetize the balance sheet, I can promise you that's not what I had in mind.
Thanks very much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and if you're interested in buying gold, and you should be, there are links to my preferred bullion dealer in the comments. There is also my guide to buying gold. I'll put a link to that in the comments as well, and I'll be back with another video very soon. Until then, goodbye.